The first bill they paid was the electricity bill, folded neatly and placed on the table like a flag planted on conquered land. I remember how one of them tapped the paper with his finger, smiling as if he had just signed a treaty. The room was bright that day, sunlight pouring through windows I had installed with my own hands years earlier. Still, they looked at the light bulbs as if the glow belonged to them now. "There," he said. "No one can say we're not responsible." I said nothing. Silence was my answer, and they misunderstood it immediately. They always do. They had arrived slowly at first. One man asking for temporary shelter, then another, then a cousin, a friend of a friend. By the end of that month, there were nearly 30 of them moving through the house as if it were a shared inheritance. Shoes piled near the door. Voices overlapped. Laughter echoed where peace used to live. I watched it all like a man standing on the riverbank, seeing the water rise inch by inch, knowing floods don't begin with noise. The utility bills became their favorite weapon. Water, electricity, gas. Each payment was announced, celebrated, exaggerated. Receipts were waved in the air. Numbers were spoken loudly. They believed responsibility could be bought monthly and ownership could be claimed with ink and stamps. "You see," one of them said, pointing at the receipt again. "If we're paying, this place runs because of us." I nodded once, slowly as if agreeing. Inside, I was counting days. They thought silence meant surrender. They thought a quiet man had nothing planned. They didn't know silence was how I listened best. I had owned this house long before their footsteps wore patterns into the floor. I remembered the cracked walls before they were painted. I remembered sleeping on the ground while building it room by room. I remembered signing documents while others were signing excuses. Ownership, to me, wasn't paper. It was memory, it was sacrifice, it was time. But none of that mattered to them. What mattered was the present moment, the comfort they felt, the illusion of control. They walked with heavier steps now, claimed rooms without asking, rearranged furniture as if rearranging authority. The house didn't resist. Houses never do. People do. They laughed when I didn't object. One of them joked, "Hay's quiet because he knows we're right." Another added, "Once you pay bills somewhere, it's basically yours." I smiled politely and went back to my room. That night, I sat alone in the dark, not because the lights were off, but because I didn't need them. I opened a notebook. The first page was blank, clean, patient. I wrote the date at the top. Then I wrote a single sentence. "They believe utilities create ownership." That sentence would grow. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. With every bill they paid, their confidence grew louder. With every joke at my expense, their guard dropped lower. They stopped seeing me as an obstacle and started seeing me as furniture. Present, quiet, harmless. That was their mistake. I watched who paid what. I listened to who spoke when. I noticed whose name was on which receipt, which bill arrived late, which one was argued over. They thought I was absent, but I was more present than ever. Silence sharpened my focus. While they argued over costs, I studied patterns. The house changed too. Walls carried new voices. Doors opened without knocking. Privacy dissolved like sugar in tea. Yet I remained calm. Calm is dangerous when misunderstood. One evening, one of them stood in the living room holding up the electricity bill like a certificate. "This proves it," he said loudly, making sure I heard. "No one can throw us out. We keep the lights on." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and for a brief second, doubt flickered in his eyes, not because of anything I said, but because of what I didn't. I simply replied, "Lights don't decide who owns the house." They laughed. That laughter echoed for a long time. Long enough for them to forget that laws don't laugh. Long enough for them to forget that silence often belongs to people who are waiting, not losing. That night, I wrote another sentence in my notebook. "They are confident because they don't know what I know." But this was only the beginning. They thought the story started with the bills. They were wrong. It started with my silence. The words were spoken casually, almost playfully, but they landed in the room like a verdict already passed. "We own this now." It was said over breakfast, between the clatter of plates and the hiss of a boiling kettle. One of them leaned back in his chair, legs stretched out, eyes scanning the ceiling as if measuring his kingdom. The others chuckled, nodding in agreement. Ownership, to them, had become a feeling, not a fact. A comfort they wore like borrowed clothes, convinced no one would ever ask for them back. I stirred my tea slowly and said nothing. Silence, once again, worked in their favor, or so they believed. From that day forward, their behavior shifted. It was subtle at first. They stopped asking permission entirely. Rooms were reassigned without discussion. My old study became a sleeping area for two men who never lowered their voices. My storage space was open-searched, repurposed. When my eyes lingered a second too long, they met my gaze with smiles that said, "What are you going to do about it?" "Nothing," I told myself. Not yet. They began to speak to outsiders differently too. Neighbors, delivery drivers, visitors. Our place, they would say. We've been here a while. Sometimes they added, the owner lives with us, as if I were a distant relative, a harmless detail. I could feel my name shrinking in their mouths. Still, I remained quiet. Confidence fed them. They grew louder, bolder, careless. Arguments broke out among themselves, about bills, about space, about respect, but never about me. I had been erased from the equation. That is what happens when people mistake patience for powerlessness. One afternoon, I overheard them talking in the courtyard. They didn't know I was there, standing just inside the door. I can't do anything, one said. We've been paying everything for months. Exactly, another replied. If it goes to court, we'll just show the bills. Court. The word floated in the air, heavy and ignorant. They spoke it like a shield, not knowing how sharp it could become when turned around. That night, I opened my notebook again. Dates, names, conversations, exact words. I wrote, we own this now in quotation marks and underlined it twice. Arrogance, when recorded, becomes evidence. They started making changes to the house. Not improvements, claims. Locks were discussed. Walls were painted without asking. A new sign appeared near the gate, handwritten and crooked, as if announcing a border. I watched it go up and felt something solidify inside me. Not anger, not fear, resolve. They wanted reaction. They wanted shouting threats, weakness. I gave them none of it. Instead, I became invisible in plain sight. I moved softly. I listened carefully. Every insult became information. Every assumption became leverage. One evening, a man I didn't recognize sat in my chair. My chair. He didn't stand when I entered. No one corrected him. This is how it is now. Someone said, half joking, half warning. We're all equal, you're equal. The word was an insult dressed as fairness. I smiled faintly and left the room. They laughed behind me. But laughter is loud because it's insecure. True power doesn't need noise. As months passed, their confidence began to rot. Small cracks appeared. Bills were paid late. Arguments escalated. They blamed each other. They blame me? He doesn't contribute. One said, as if contribution defined ownership. Another replied, Hay's lucky we let him stay. Let me stay. That sentence almost made me speak. Almost dead. I went back to my room and reviewed everything I had collected. Papers, photos, records, timelines. I was no longer living day to day. I was living ahead of them, several moves into the future. They believed ownership was something you could declare loudly enough for it to become true. They believed presence replaced permission. They believed silence meant consent. They were wrong on all three counts. One night, during another loud argument, one of them shouted, if he had a problem, he would have said something by now. I closed my notebook and turned off the light. Some truths don't arrive with words. They arrive with consequences. And I was done being quiet for their comfort. By the time the number reached 30, they stopped pretending it was temporary. 30 men. 30 opinions. 30 egos packed into a house that was never meant to carry their weight. The noise became constant, footsteps at all hours, voices rising and falling, arguments bleeding through walls. They filled every corner with themselves, as if occupation alone could rewrite history. And in the middle of it all, there was me, one man, quiet. They began to treat me like a problem that hadn't decided to fight back yet. That made me dangerous in their minds, but not enough to fear. They watched me the way hunters watch an animal that doesn't run. Confused, amused, impatient. The targeting started slowly. It was in the jokes first. He's the silent partner. Someone laughed one night. Another added, partners usually get a share. What does he get? Laughter followed. Loud, careless laughter. I kept my eyes on my plate and count how many of them joined in. Then came the comments. You should be grateful. Not everyone gets to live rent-free. You're lucky we handle the bills. Each sentence was a small push, testing how far they could go without resistance. I gave them nothing. That absence of reaction unsettled them more than anger ever could. So they escalated. They spoke about me while I was in the room, as if I were already gone. They debated rules, schedules, changes, never once asking my opinion. When I entered a space, conversations paused, then resumed with exaggerated normality. It was clear now they had chosen me as the symbol of what they believed they had conquered. 30 voices need a common enemy to feel united. I was convenient. One evening, all of them were gathered in the main room. Someone had brought guests. Strangers sat on my sofa, leaned against my walls, drank from my cups. I stood near the doorway, unnoticed until one of them pointed at me. This is him? He said. The quiet one. A guest laughed. Quiet people always have something to hide. The room agreed. I met his eyes and held the silence just long enough to make it uncomfortable. Then I nodded once and walked away. Behind me, I heard someone say, see, nothing there. They were wrong again. That night, I didn't sleep, not because of fear, but because clarity had arrived. I understood their churn now. Loudest voice led, weakest conscience followed. Responsibility was shared just enough to be denied later. 30 men, but no single spine. That is when I realized something important. They thought they were many and I was alone. They didn't see that I had something they didn't, unity of purpose. The targeting became more direct after that. My belongings were moved without permission. Things went missing. Small, deliberate acts meant to provoke a reaction. They wanted proof of weakness. They wanted anger. They wanted to justify what they were becoming. I responded by documenting everything. Dates, times, witnesses, exact phrases. Who laughed? Who stayed silent? Silence, I learned, can be as loud as cruelty when written down. One afternoon, one of them confronted me openly. "You never say anything. Do you even belong here?" I looked at him calmly and replied, "I've always belonged here." He scoffed. "Then act like it." I didn't explain. Explanations are wasted on people who have already decided their truth. Their unity began to fracture soon after. 30 voices can shout together, but they can't think together. Disagreements multiplied. Accusations flew. Someone accused another of stealing. Another threatened to leave. Panic hid beneath their arrogance. And through it all, they watched me. They couldn't understand how I remained untouched by the chaos they created. My calm began to irritate them. It made them nervous. Calm looks like confidence when you don't understand its source. One night, during a heated argument, someone shouted, "He thinks he's better than us." I didn't correct him, because in that moment, I knew something they didn't yet realize. 30 voices can drown out the truth for a while, but the truth only needs one voice spoken at the right time. And my time was getting closer. The day I disappeared, no one noticed. That was the most important part. I didn't leave the house. I didn't pack a bag or slam a door. I still slept in the same room, ate at the same table, walked through the same hallways, but I withdrew from their world completely. No opinions, no reactions, no visible resistance. I became background. And they let me. People only miss what interrupts them. I no longer did. Weeks passed, then months. A full year unfolded quietly, measured not by calendars but by changes in their behavior. They grew careless. Conversations happened openly in front of me. Plans were discussed without lowering voices. They spoke as if I were furniture, present, silent, irrelevant. That was the year I learned everything. I learned who actually paid the bills and who only took credit. I learned whose name appeared on documents and whose never did. I learned who panicked when deadlines approached and who relied on intimidation to cover incompetence. Most importantly, I learned how much they believed in their own myth. They told each other the same story every day. "We've been here too long to be removed. He waited too long. The law will protect us." Repetition made them comfortable. Comfort made them sloppy. While they argued over expenses and space, I was elsewhere. In records offices, on official websites, in quiet conversations with people who didn't shout. I asked questions without revealing motives. I listened without arguing. I confirmed what I already knew and filled in what I didn't. I didn't rush. Rushing is for people who are afraid of losing. They mistook my disappearance for defeat. One of them said it outright one night. "He's given up. If he had a move, he would have made it by now." I almost laughed. The truth was, I was finally moving, just not where they could see. That year stripped away any remaining doubt. I no longer wondered if I was being unfair, if I should speak up, if maybe coexistence was possible. Their behavior answered those questions for me. Entitlement hardens when left unchecked. Respect does not grow in stolen space. They changed more things in the house during that year. More locks, more paint, more claims. Each change felt permanent to them, like driving a nail deeper. To me, it was just another marker in time, another line in a timeline that was becoming very clear. I documented everything, not emotionally, precisely. Photos with dates, copies of notices, records of who authorized what. Silence, when paired with accuracy, becomes powerful. There were moments they tried to pull me back in. Arguments engineered to provoke me. Accusations designed to force a response. One man blocked my path once and said, "You think staying quiet makes you smart?" I met his eyes and replied, "No." He waited for more. There was none. That answer stayed with him. I could see it in his hesitation afterward, the way his confidence stuttered for half a second when our paths crossed. Silence doesn't always weaken people. Sometimes it unsettles them. By the end of that year, they were no longer united. They were simply crowded. Alliances shifted. Trust eroded. Every man believed someone else would take the fall if things went wrong. That belief would cost them everything. On the final night of that year, I sat alone in my room and reviewed what I had gathered. The stack was thick now, enough to tell a story no shouting could erase, enough to end the one they had been telling themselves. I wrote the last line in my notebook for that year. They think I disappeared. I was preparing. I closed the notebook and placed it carefully on the table. The next phase wouldn't require silence. It would require timing. The bills arrived like clockwork. Water, electricity, gas, internet. They treated each envelope like proof of conquest. Whoever held the receipt walked taller that day. Whoever paid last spoke loudest at night. Bills were no longer expenses. They were badges of authority, waved during arguments, slammed onto tables, cited whenever someone needed to feel important. This place runs because of us, one of them said, tapping the electricity bill. If we stop paying, everything stops. They believed that. What they didn't understand was that every bill they paid was also a record. Every payment created a trail, and trails lead somewhere. By now, their confidence had twisted into entitlement. They spoke openly about permanence. Even if he tries something, one said, we'll show the bills. Judges love proof. Others nodded, satisfied. In their minds, receipts had replaced rights. I listened. I always listened. They never noticed how often the names on the bills changed. How some months one man paid, other months another. How payments were sometimes late, sometimes partial. How arguments broke out when someone refused to cover a share. The unity they claimed existed only in words, not in structure. Bills, I realized, were becoming their chains. They couldn't leave without losing face. They couldn't stop paying without admitting weakness. And they couldn't explain clearly who was responsible for what. What they saw as power was actually obligation tightening around them. One evening, a heated argument exploded over the water bill. Voices rose. Accusations flew. You said you paid? No, you said you would? The receipt was missing. Panic followed. For a brief moment, the mask slipped. I saw fear, not of cost, but of exposure. I stayed out of it. Later that night, I added another entry to my records. Date, names, exact phrases, the missing receipt. Their panic mattered more than the bill itself. They started using bills as threats against me. If we're paying, you don't get a say. You don't contribute. You don't contribute. You live off us. The irony was almost impressive. They lived in my house, yet spoke as if I were dependent on their permission. I didn't correct them. Instead, I quietly gathered certified copies of what actually mattered. Ownership documents, historical records, official boundaries. Things that didn't arrive monthly, didn't change hands casually, didn't care who paid for light bulbs. The more they leaned on bills, the more careless they became with everything else. They made mistakes. Big ones. They tried to put utilities in new names without authorization. They argued with service workers. They left written messages they assumed no one would keep. They believed control over services meant control over property. Every mistake tightened the chain. One man proudly announced one night, "We're untouchable now." Too much time has passed. Time again. They loved that word. As if time automatically rewarded arrogance. As if waiting without understanding the law changed facts. I watched their faces as they said it. Some were confident. Others weren't so sure. Doubt had begun to spread, slow and quiet, the way rot spreads inside a wall. They noticed my calm more now. It irritated them. One asked me directly, "Why aren't you worried?" I answered honestly, "Because I know what matters." He laughed, but it was forced. Laughter is different when it's trying to convince itself. Bills continued to arrive. Envelopes stacked up. Arguments repeated. Responsibility blurred. What once gave them pride now gave them stress. I could see it in their eyes when the mail arrived. Power had turned into pressure. They didn't realize it yet, but they were trapped by the very they planned to use against me. Bills don't grant ownership. They create obligations. And obligations, when misunderstood, become chains. I was done collecting. The next move would make them understand the difference. The knock came early in the morning, not loud, not aggressive, just firm enough to be taken seriously. It wasn't the kind of knock that asks for permission. It was the kind that assumes authority. The house fell silent in a way I had never heard before. 30 men, usually so loud, froze at once. Footsteps paused. Conversations died mid-sentence. For the first time since they arrived, silence didn't belong to me alone. I opened my door and waited. Someone whispered, "Who is it?" No one answered. The knock came again, sharper this time. Panic moved through the house like electricity, real electricity, not the kind they thought they controlled. Doors opened. Faces appeared in hallways. Eyes searched for someone to blame. I walked past them calmly and opened the main door. 2 officials stood outside, neutral expressions, clipboards, no emotion, just procedure. "Good morning," one said. "We're here regarding the property." The word property landed hard. They gathered behind me now, suddenly united, suddenly interested in my presence. The same men who ignored me, mocked me, erased me, now standing close, listening to every word I exchanged. One of them stepped forward quickly. "We live here, we pay the bills." The official nodded politely. "That's noted," I said nothing. Another man added, louder this time, "We've been here a long time." "Also noted," the official replied. Then he looked at me. "Are you the registered owner?" I handed him the folder, not dramatically, not proudly, just carefully. The shift was immediate. Names were checked. Dates confirmed. The official's tone changed, not in volume, but in certainty. Power doesn't announce itself. It recognizes facts and moves accordingly. This property is registered under your name, he said. Sole ownership. The room felt smaller suddenly. Someone laughed nervously. What about the utilities? We've been paying everything. The second official finally spoke. Utility payments do not establish ownership. Silence fell, heavy, humiliating silence. I watched their faces as the truth landed. Some went angry, some looked betrayed, as if the law had personally insulted them. They searched my face for triumph. There was none. I had waited too long for that. Instructions were given, deadlines explained, papers handed out. Calm, professional, unstoppable. The officials weren't there to argue. They were there to correct a misunderstanding that had gone on far too long. This isn't fair, someone protested. We made this place livable, another said. We paid for everything? The official replied evenly. Payment of utilities does not confer property rights. That sentence cut deeper than any insult I could have spoken. They turned to me then, 30 pairs of eyes, accusation, disbelief, anger, all of it aimed my way. You planned this? One said. I met his gaze. I prepared. There was a difference. The officials left after setting the process in motion. The door closed behind them, and with it, the illusion that had protected these men for so long. No one spoke for a while. The house felt different now. Not louder, not quieter, lighter. As if a weight had shifted from its foundation back to where it belonged. One man finally broke the silence. So what happens now? I looked around at the walls I built, the floors I paid for, the space they had tried to claim with noise and receipts. Now, I said calmly, the truth takes over. For the first time since they arrived, they understood something important. Power had never been in the bills. It had been in the patience. And patience had just changed hands?